Holiday Monday, and let us talk election and particular seats now, which is always the most fascinating thing. It is possible the SNP could win nearly every seat in Scotland. They might even win every seat. How about that? The potential loss of some of Labour's safest seats in its heartland, no less, is perfectly illustrated by the battle over Paisley and Renfrewshire South, a constituency to the west of Glasgow. Here, Douglas Alexander, the shadow Foreign Secretary, a former cabinet minister who's now running the Labour UK election campaign, could see his massive 16,000 majority overturned by a 20-year-old politics student standing for the SNP. Polls last month suggest that the newcomer Mhairi Black could beat Mr Alexander by taking 50% of the vote or more. She's currently about 8% ahead of him. Victory could make her the youngest MP in the House of Commons. What is going on? Let us hear from the candidates. We'll listen to them individually. We joined first of all by Douglas Alexander, Shadow Foreign Secretary, although maybe not for much longer, I guess.
Well, good afternoon, Jeremy. I hope we have a Labour government on Friday morning, and the way we can deliver a Labour government is for people in every part of Great Britain to vote Labour. That's my straightforward and clear message to voters here in Renfrewshire. If we want a Labour government on Friday, we have to vote Labour on Thursday. It's as simple as that.
Did you take it for granted? Did you take Scotland for granted, not just in this election, but going back years and years?
No, not at all. Renfrewshire's where I come from. It's the community I grew up in. It's the community I care most about. When I was on the doors yesterday...
Not your seat, I mean the whole country.
No, I don't think we took Scotland for granted. We delivered the Scottish Parliament, the first democratic parliament in 300 years. We've seen a Scottish Labour Prime Minister within the last 10 years. The fact is, what we've seen since the referendum is, if you like, the afterglow of the huge numbers of sentiments and emotions that were generated by that referendum. Of course that's true, but something that we're seeing in Scotland is something else that we're seeing across Europe, which is in a context of distrust, the way you introduced this package talking about you can't believe politicians, in that context of distrust, when people are struggling economically, that creates pretty fertile territory for populist nationalist parties, and we've seen that elsewhere in Europe, and we're certainly seeing that in Scotland as well.
Do you think it might be that you campaigned with the Conservatives against Scottish independence, and people, a whole load of people voting in Scotland will not forgive Labour for that?
I don't honestly think so. Keir Hardie founded our party in Lanarkshire more than 100 years ago. He went on to represent working people in West Ham and in South Wales, because we're a party that believes in solidarity. We believe that we are stronger together and we'd be weaker apart. The main message of the trade union movement over more than a century has been our unity is our strength. So in that sense, it's hardly a surprise that the party of Keir Hardie has continued to believe that the real challenge is not the divide between Scotland and England, but actually whether the country works for working people. And in that sense, we played our part in the decision that Scotland reached. But alas, we've got a nationalist candidate here in Paisley who doesn't seem to accept that result and says that her election would be the means to twist arms and get that other referendum. Personally, I don't think that's the right choice for Scotland. I think we made our decision in unprecedented numbers last September. The challenge now is to get on and deliver more nurses for our local hospital here in Paisley, ban exploitative zero-hours contracts, increase the minimum wage. Those are the kind of issues that I think we can get, but we can only get if we have a Labour government. And honestly, the one vote that David Cameron does not want people to cast in this constituency is a vote for me as the Labour candidate. He knows he's not going to win in Scotland. He's hoping that the SNP do his work for him in taking down the Labour number, so that, as we saw on the front page of the Sunday Times yesterday, he's already indicated that if he has one more seat than Labour on Friday, he hopes to stay in Downing Street and put a Queen's speech to the House of Commons. OK, take us local, because we can talk about the constituency. We're going to talk to all the candidates. You were born not quite there, but thereabouts, is that right? That's right, I was born in Glasgow, yes. Rotten Row Maternity Hospital.
And I said there was a piece on the news the other night of you going door to door, and I guess you know those doors and doorsteps very well indeed.
I do indeed. Listen, I went to school, primary, secondary school here in Renfrewshire. It's, as I say, the community I know best. I knocked on a door yesterday and met somebody who was at school with me, and I'm glad to say they were voting for me as well.
But does that? Do you have a bit of a sense of a ring rustiness? You've been round this seat so many times. People are getting tired of with the greatest respect, tired of seeing your face. They might want a new one.
No, I don't think so. I think it's a huge asset in this environment of such cynicism and distrust towards politics to be a local man representing local people. When I sit in the Morrison supermarket in my constituency most Saturdays, There's nobody there other than the people who you engage with and talk to. And the way that I see that you do a job as a local representative is you have to listen before you talk. You have to understand the issues people are concerned about. Why is it that our local hospital, the Royal Alexandra Hospital, for more than 290 weeks has missed its A&E target? Why is it that the Scottish Government has let us down so badly that actually we've got a local hospital, despite fantastic staff doing fantastic work, that's in a state of crisis? Those are the kind of questions that we deserve answers from the Scottish National Party.
And are you getting back to you on the doorstep people saying, look, fine, but we don't want to be part of the UK anymore?
Well, of course, there was a minority within this community who voted yes in the referendum. There was a clear majority in favour of staying part of the family that is the United Kingdom. But my opponent, the SNP candidate, has described those people who voted no in the referendum as gullible. I actually think it's quite important as a local representative to respect people in your constituency, whether they agree with you or not. And in that sense, I think that, of course, there's divided opinions on the issue of the Constitution. But the real choice we face on Thursday are the removal vans outside Downing Street on Friday afternoon. And my sense is, while we were divided on the issue of the referendum last September in Scotland, we're united in our ambition to make sure that we get rid of this Conservative government and get a fresh start with Labour.
Thank you very much indeed. Douglas Alexander, Labour candidate, shadow Foreign Secretary. So we're in, if you like, in that constituency of Paisley and Renfrewshire South where he has been the MP. The person who's challenging him most closely is the SNP candidate, who's just 20 years old. Mhairi Black, good afternoon.
Afternoon.
What do you make of what you just heard?
Well, I think it's actually highlighting just how out of touch Labour are right now. I think they have entirely taken Scotland for granted for far too many years, and I think that people are now starting to realise that they have been taken for granted, and that the reality is, in this election, if the people of Scotland want a strong voice within Westminster, the SNP are the only people offering that.
But you talked a lot, your party's talked a lot about the anti-Tory vote, and
Yep.
Mr Alexander is correct, is he not, in saying that the more Labour MPs there are, the more chance that David Cameron has to get into a removals van on Friday morning.
Well, no, I don't think that's accurate whatsoever, because you see, Labour have been selling this myth to Scotland for years that somehow if we vote Labour we keep out Conservative governments. Well, Scotland has been voting Labour for many years, and yet we continually have Conservative governments. The reality is that if we can have as more anti-Tory MPs in Westminster, then we can lock David Cameron out of Downing Street.
3 out of the last 4 governments have been Labour, though.
Uh-huh.
So when you say you continually have Conservative governments, that's just not true.
Well, I mean, you just have to look all the way back. 1970, 1979, 1983, 87, 92, and then again in 2010. We have seen it in multiple occasions that voting Labour is not a guarantee that we don't get Conservatives. By voting SNP, what you can guarantee is that we will do it all in our power to lock David Cameron out of Westminster.
And you think that's democratic, do you?
Well, of course, if the people of Scotland choose to cast their vote and lend the SNP their vote, then that's entirely democratic.
Just let me ask you about your age, Mary. You're 20 years old, yeah?
Yep.
This sounds like an old fogey question here, but at 20, do you have enough life experience to serve in Parliament?
Well, you see, I mean, I would never claim to have the same level of life experience as a 40 or 50-year-old, but when I look to my representatives, the most important thing to me is, do you understand the issues that are affecting people's lives? Do you have the answers to them? Are you offering something different? Are you capable? Are you honest? Do you have integrity? You know, these are the things that matter most. And I think what we're seeing across Scotland right now is that people are not interested in aesthetic things like age or gender or anything else, you know, because I can't help what age I am. What they're interested in is the arguments that we're making. And the SNP are the only party at the forefront of this election, certainly in Scotland, who seem to be listening to people and offering that alternative of an end to austerity, an end to cuts, and we want to see more progressive politics.
People have become quite big fans of your Twitter feed. For example, after a night out when you say, woke up beside half a can of Tennent's and a full pizza and more money than I came out with, I call that a success.
Well, the irony of that is that I was actually, excuse me, I was actually after going to a priest's 50th, and it was actually a sarcastic tweet. And I think, if anything, it actually highlights just how poor some of the reporting is in Scotland, and that it missed that fact and has been used to portray something totally inaccurate.
And I effing hate Celtic and all that stuff.
Well, like that, of course, I cringe at that myself, things that I said as a teenager, you know. And I think there are many politicians who are just thanking their lucky stars that Twitter wasn't about when they were saying their daft comments as teenagers. But if anything, I actually think it highlights just just how poor the quality of argument is coming from my opponents. Because if you're having to hold to account tweets made by a teenager before they had any kind of responsibility, and you're using them in an election where we have some of the worst poverty and some of the worst, austerity, I think that their priorities are highly skewed.
And Mhairi, what are you going down to Westminster to do?
It's to give Scotland a strong voice and to try and use our influence as best we can to end these cuts, to end austerity, and to start putting forward economic policies that put people first, because that's what's been missing for the last 5 years.
Would you consider that you had a duty to vote on matters that affect England when you're in Westminster?
Well, you see, this is always quite a troublesome one, because there are issues that sometimes appear to be English only but actually affect Scotland, through second hand. So I think if we can use our clout within Westminster to pursue policies that are about helping people and putting people first, then I think that's something very positive, and I think it's something that's being desired across the whole of the UK, never mind Scotland.
Thank you very much indeed. Nice to talk to you. Mhairi Black, SNP candidate for this really hotly contested seat, Paisley and Renfrewshire South. Should be a safe Labour seat. 16,000 majority they had at the last election 2010. Douglas Alexander, the MP, who got in then, and local man, as he said, but he is now fighting for his political life. There are other candidates